start now. Just before we start in with Richard's talk, I've been asked to give you a quick reminder to make sure that you've got your hats and coats and what have you reclaimed from the cloakroom before 5 o'clock. So make sure you get that done pretty sharpish is the basic message there. However, that's not what we're here for at the moment. What we're actually here to listen to is Richard Freeman. Richard's probably well known to the majority of us, a very active member of the Fortean community and the Perilous community. He's a long-term member of the Centre for Fortean Zoology. In a previous life, Richard worked in a zoo, so he's coming at this from a very sort of scientific side of things, and he does have a sort of natural history background there, which he brings to work in the various expeditions he participates on. And Richard's been fortunate enough over the years to participate in loads of expeditions, and he's going to be talking to us today about one of those expeditions. But just before we start that, I'll give you one little known fact about Richard Freeman. Richard Freeman owns the world's largest collection of cuttlefish genitalia. So, ladies and gentlemen, the search for the almasty with Richard Freeman.
Just before, can everybody hear me? I don't mind sounding like Norman Collier. Just before I start on the almasty, I'd like to bring something to your attention. Charles Fort, Theodore Roosevelt, separated at birth. Earlier this year, I travelled to the Caucasus mountains in Russia to hunt for the almasty. The almasty, variously known as albasti, almas, gull, or dev, is a upright walking, very powerfully built hominid, reported from much of the former USSR. We've got a reconstruction here. The sightings I heard about, they tend to endow it with a thick mane of long hair around the head as well. So if you imagine that in a long wig, you might get an idea of what the creature looks like. It's radically different from the more familiar yeti. It seems to be much more human-like. A hominid rather than a pongid. The yeti is probably a giant ape related to the orangutan. This thing is much more closely related to human beings. Why did we go and look for the almasty in Russia? Well, whenever I start to do an expedition, I start thinking about doing an expedition, I look at the pros and cons of it, both financially and the viability of actually finding the creature and evidence of it itself. Now, I'd heard of a Ukrainian biologist called Gregory Panchenko. Can we have the next slide, please? Here he is in a cave up a mountain. Gregory Panchenko, now, he had been working in an area of the Caucasus Mountains, close to the borders with Georgia, fairly near where they had all the woodchucks, for at least 14 years, and he had seen the almasty on a number of occasions. He believed that they were on the increase in this particular area, sparsely populated, and there seemed to be some human-almasty interaction. He's a very well-respected biologist. He's Ukrainian, but he lives in Germany and works a lot in Russia. As I say, he had seen it on a number of occasions, so I decided to contact him. And contacting Gregory Panchenko was almost as hard as finding the almasty itself. It took me a very long time to get hold of him, but finally we did get hold of him, and we had him over to talk at the Weird Weekend, which is the CFZ convention we hold down at Wolseley. And he was a fascinating man. He sounded a little bit more like a more nervous version of Borat, so you had to listen to him a bit to get all the information. But I realised there was a very interesting case to be addressed here, and we decided to team up with Gregory and some of his colleagues and do an expedition to the Caucasus Mountains. The expedition from the British contingent included, as well as myself, Dr. Chris Clark, who's come on virtually every expedition we've ever done, Adam Davis of Extreme Expeditions, who I've never worked with before, but we always wanted to team up together, CFZ member Dave Archer, and Adam's friend Keith Townley. We, after a sort of mind-bending 10-hour wait in Moscow airport. We made out to a place called Minerali Vodi, and we met with an archaeologist called Alexei, who together with Gregory drove us up to these set of mountains called the Stepmother's Teeth, because they were these hideous, ragged-looking things that are meant to look like a crone's gnashes. And that particular one is very interesting. That's called White Mountain, or White Cliff. And we based ourselves at the bottom of it. Now, it was only very recently that a road was actually created up to this area of the Caucasus Mountains. And on their way up, they ploughed straight through a number of tombs. Can we have the next? They ploughed through a number of tombs belonging to a group of people called the Salmatians, and there's thought to be at least 1,000 tombs there. The road went straight through them. Our campsite, literally on either side, it was like a bisected tomb with skulls and femurs tumbling down out of it. We met with another member of the team there, another archaeologist called Anatoly, who had very little English but a great sense of humour and an even greater love of vodka. And his catchphrase was, "Richard, we need vodka." But Alexei and Anatoly had been studying these tombs for quite some time, excavating them and sending what they found off to various museums. Now here we've got two skulls. The skull at the top is fairly ordinary shaped human skull. But if you look at the one at the bottom, it comes to a sort of point there. Now, when Gregory had first discovered one of these skulls, he thought for a minute he'd found the skull of the almasty. Then he realised it was far too fragile, far too thin. And what it is actually a human skull that's been distorted by being bound when the individual was a child. It gets taken to its extreme in some Central American cultures. You must have seen the skulls with very long, elongate domes on at the top, all done by binding. These were the slaves who had their heads bound in that way, and their tombs were lower down, whereas the noble people were higher up on the mountain. Can we have the next slide, please? There. If you see that little weird shape, if you didn't know better, you'd think that was something ape-like. Maybe the beginnings of a sagittal crest, but it's not. It's an ordinary human. He's just had the headband. You can see jawbones there. They were all over the place. I've never seen anywhere like it. They were just tumbling out of the rock faces there. Next one, please. That's another tomb there. Please. And again, see there. Leg bones sticking out the top. Another skull. There. Now that's white rock surrounded by mist, so looking very brooding and strange. Now, forgetting about the weirdly shaped human skulls down there, 2 weeks before we got here, Gregory had been investigating caves along here, and he'd come across some other skull fragments that looked human, but were very, very thick. I mean, I'm talking about, quarter of an inch thick, maybe half an inch thick, much thicker than a human skull. He had found in a cave here, so we decided our first port of call was here and to set up some camera traps and have a look around some of the caves. So we made the trek up, found the cave in question. There was no more bone in it, but we did find some dung samples which we all bagged up. And we decided to set up some camera traps and then go back down to camp. Next step. That there's Alexei. He's one of the archaeologists. As you can see, it's very sheer. Dave Archer, madly in high winds, tried to climb up even further like Spider-Man up one of these sheer cliffs, but he very nearly got to the top, but then he thought discretion was the better part of valour in the end. And the next one, please. That's one of the other archaeologists. Anatoly is the vodka nut, and he actually has seen the almasty himself. Around the campfire at night, they recounted some of the encounters they'd had with the almasty and some of the stories they'd heard from witnesses. Anatoly had seen the creature back in the 1980s at an abandoned farm near a town called Neutrino that we were to visit later on. And he said he was hunkered down in camouflage gear. It was a very, very bright moonlit night, and he saw this creature walk past him at a distance of no more than 10 feet. He said it was a little under 2 metres tall, very powerfully built, very muscular, no neck to speak of, a high dome head, sagittal crest, ape-like nose, thick brow, very little chin, covered in grey hair, like the colour of a poplar tree, is how he described it. And he said it was swinging its arms as it walked past him, seemingly completely oblivious. Gregory himself, in the early 80s, had another encounter, very close range, at a different farm, this time an inhabited farm, where he said that the farmer told him that he kept an elderly mare in one of the barns, and at night something was coming in and plaiting the hair of the mane of the horse, and he was convinced it was an almasty. So Gregory left out some apples and some milk in the barn and secreted himself in some hay and waited, and unfortunately he fell asleep. He woke up, it was dark, but there was moonlight pouring through an open window at the top of the barn. It wasn't actually a window, it was shutters, wooden shutters, but these were open, moonlight was pouring in, and he could hear a strange noise. He described it as like something smacking its lips, and then sort of bird-like twittering sound. And he peered out from his hiding place and saw, no more than about 12 feet away, a immature male almasty, once again powerfully built, long dark hair, playing around with the mane of this horse and entertaining itself, stopping occasionally, smacking its lips and making these weird little noises, tying knots in the horse's mane. The horse didn't seem to really mind. He watched it for about 10 minutes, and he said it made this incredible leap up onto the beam that ran across this barn and out through the window. And he said he was, within 12 feet of it and watched it for 10 minutes. Some other stories we heard at other encounters included one Bulgarian farmer that told them that the creature had approached his farmhouse and he'd set his large, dangerous Caucasian shepherd dog on it, and the creature had got a club and it killed the dog with one swipe of his club, entered his house and stole a big Bulgarian cheese. Why the almasty wants to eat Bulgarian cheese, God knows. It tastes like rubber and it has the texture of rubber. It's awful, it really is terrible, but it's made off with a cheese. He also said, the funny thing about almasties is they seem to be left-handed. Whenever they've been seen doing anything, they have very primitive tool use. They don't have fire, they don't really make weapons, they use clubs, they throw rocks. But whenever they're seen doing anything, they seem to favour their left hand for some reason. Another man said he saw one hanging around his house one evening and threw a stone at it. And then walked back towards his house quite nervously. And then this creature lifted up a large rock and hurled it, and it flew right over the man's house and landed down in his backyard. And in the morning it took 2 fully grown men to actually lift this thing off the floor. But the almasty, and this is an example of its strength, had thrown this rock right across this man's house. Another man said he found one wandering around his house once, and he was brave enough to go and socket one. It's more than I do, I've done. Go up and give it a punch, and he said the thing turned around, and it didn't hit him with a closed fist, it used an open-handed swipe with its left hand. It hit him and knocked him 15 feet, and then walked away. They seem to be very, very non-aggressive unless they're provoked. They'll usually try and avoid antagonistic situations, but they do seem to approach human habitation if they think they can get food there, but only very remote places. You won't find them wandering into the middle of villages and things. Next, please. Now that's the other member of the team. That's Hummer the crypto dog. She's a cross between a spaniel and a red setter, and she belonged to Alexi. I'm absolutely gaga about dogs, I love them. And she was a lovely dog, and she went everywhere with us for the whole expedition. Hummer came with us. Next one, please. This is one of the small caves that we had a look at. Now, the trouble with, I hate using this because I've got a sort of flow of consciousness and I'd rather go with that rather than basing it on the photographs. But that was another one of the small caves we had a look at. We found some very dry dung in there which we bagged up. and brought back for analysis. The almasty is not the only strange creature reported from the Caucasus Mountains. There's also reports of an immensely large snake. It's supposed to be black in colour and up to 10 metres long. Anatoly said that he had seen one in a more southerly lowland part of Kabardino-Balkaria in about 1987. He was being lowered into a cave, and he said he saw what a snake he estimated to be around 7 metres long swimming off in an underground river. His father in Kazakhstan, way back when he was a hunter, had seen one of these giant snakes as well in a swamp, and he said that at first he thought it was a tree trunk sticking up out of the water, and as he got closer he thought it was a man standing still. When he got closer still, he saw it was this immense snake holding its head and neck up out of the water to a height of about 6 feet. And Gregory thinks that many of the sightings of so-called Russian lake monsters are actually huge snakes swimming with their head and neck out of the water. Next, please. That's Adam, still at White Cliff. Next one, please. Aha. Now here's where it gets interesting. Right, we spent several days in this first area, the White Cliff, and apart from having a jackal run through our camp in the middle of the night, nothing really that much happened. The third day we were there, we split up, and Adam went to interview a man named Sergit, who had been found by Gregory, who said that he knew where there was a corpse of an almasty. He'd found it a number of years earlier under what appeared to be a rockfall. He thought it had been killed by the rockfall. It was apparently female, and he had extracted the tooth from the body, but he was pretty sure that remains still were under this large rockfall. And Adam, who interviews people for a living, went to interview him, came away fairly convinced that this guy was telling the truth, or at least what he believed to be the truth. In the meantime, Keith and I, together with Anatoly, had investigated a forest. Now, from a distance, it looked like a lush, verdant meadow. When he got up close, the grass was in fact 6 to 7 foot tall stinging nettles. It was very steep and slippy, and it took us all day to climb up this hill. Terribly hard going, getting stung all the time. We came across a hare, a very interesting hare that seemed to be 3 different colours, black and a light creamy colour, then brown. At first I got very excited, then I found another one and another, and then I realised what I was looking at was actually the bristles from a wild boar. Unfortunately not almasty hair. We did find some strange marks on a tree that looked like they'd been made by nails rather than claws. They looked like it had been scratched by someone with fingernails rather than the claws of a bear. But other than that, we didn't find very much. So we decided to pack up and move to our second port of call, which was a place near Elborus, which is much closer to the borders with Georgia. This is the mountain upon which the corpse was supposed to have been buried, and we had no end of fun on this mountain. I'm just trying to remember the name of it in my notes. Kashkotash, Mount Kashkotash. So, we've been camping so far, but near to this area was a sort of a little holiday village with some delightful Moomin-esque shacks. So we actually had a roof over our head for a little while. We got there fairly late on in the afternoon. We met this man Sergit, who looked a little bit like Father Ted, and his very attractive daughter Tanya, who was the interpreter. Now, we were split on this. I found Tanya very attractive. All the other guys thought she was a complete boiler. So it's because I've been away too long. But I thought she was quite sweet. Bulgarian women are very attractive. Pale skin, dark hair, large dark eyes. They look like goths without even trying. Anyway, Sergit was dressed in a short sleeve shirt and some slip-on shoes. He told us that the body wasn't very far up the mountain, it was about a half an hour's walk. So we thought, well, no time like the present, let's get up and scope the area out. Even though it was fairly late in the afternoon, it was just going to be a little jaunt up the mountain. So off we went. It was a little steep, but nothing you couldn't cope with. We got to the area of the first snows, the snow line, and I thought, oh yes, pause for a breather. This must be the area. Yeah, it won't be too hard to rummage through the rocks here, and if there's anything left, we might well find it. But then Sergit carried on going. Oh, maybe it's a little bit higher. So we followed Sergit a little bit higher. Then there was an enormous boulder, about half the size of this hall, an enormous boulder with little plaques on it. Well, that's interesting. What's this? And I looked at this, and there were plaques to about 24 or so people who had been killed on this mountain, which was apparently incredibly dangerous. And we carried on going higher and higher and higher. Now, we had no climbing equipment. We were all dressed as if we were going for a stroll in the park on a Sunday afternoon, because he told us it was only half an hour up the mountain. Liar. It kept getting higher and higher and steeper and more treacherous. And eventually we got broke up. The whole party got broke up. And there was one area which was like a great sheet of ice and frozen snow that I had to get across. So I took a step out onto this. My foot went straight through it. It looked solid, but it wasn't. My foot went straight through it. Oh, it's gone. That's technology for you. Okay, can you still hear me? Yeah. It's a shame because I like to walk up and down when I'm talking. I hate standing still. I fell flat on my stomach and started sliding down this massive sheet of ice, getting faster and faster and faster. And I realised, funnily enough, I stayed dead calm, but I realised this was a pretty dangerous situation, to say the least. And I tried to dig in with my nails, nothing doing. It was like marble floor, so slippy. I realised this sheet of ice was leading to a 300-foot drop with jagged rocks underneath it, and that zoologist puree would be on the menu fairly soon. So I had to swing myself round on my stomach and ram both my heels into a pile of scree to slow myself down. And eventually I slowed myself down. And looking back up the slope, I could see the trail I'd made sliding on my belly. And I thought, well, there's no way I'm ever going to get across this. I'm too heavy, it's too slippy. So I decided to sit and wait for the others, and time was ticking on. It was getting darker and darker. And being stuck on this mountain at night would be about as safe as French kissing a saltwater crocodile. Some of the other guys managed to make it to the general area where the body was supposed to be, which was right near the peak. And unfortunately, by the time they got there, it was too late to do anything. They just had to turn around and come back. Eventually they met me on the way back down, and we started the way back down again, which was just as treacherous. Once again, we got split up. Can I have the next? No, I've got to use technology. There. Now, on one side of the mountain, you had masses of slippery scree and these great sheets of ice and frozen snow. On the other side, you had a retreating glacier that had gouged out these crumbly old cliffs. That, if you watch the glacier and listen for any amount of time, you occasionally hear it creak and rumble, and there'd be rocks falling down. Now, I was walking along some cliffs on the way back down, having been split up from the rest of the party, when the cliffs gave way underneath me, and I was left hanging off some tree branches in a sort of Indiana Jones style, off a 50-foot cliff, once again leading to some delightfully jagged rocks and great shards of ice. So I had to swing my legs up, wrap them around the branch, then haul myself back up again. And that was much more hairy for some reason than sliding down the sheet of ice. But eventually, that's twice in one day, this mountain's had a go at killing me. Eventually, we got back down again. Next day, like a bunch of idiots, we decided to go back up again. We put on sensible shoes this time. To try and get to this area where the body was supposed to be and have a good look around. At about 10,000 feet, I started having blackouts, and it was rather like the iris of a camera, you know, closing, couldn't see a thing. And I thought, oh, hang on, being blind with a 10,000 foot drop near you is not a very good idea. So I had to sit down and catch my breath while the others went on. I don't do altitude too well. I don't do mountains too well. The others went on, had a good dig round in this area, found absolutely nothing. Came back down again. This time we managed to get back down without any further incident. So, as I make it, that's 3 times this bloody mountain's had to go and kill it. The next day, most of us went out to interview an old man in a nearby village who knew about the almasty. Dave Archer, like a bleeding idiot, went back up the mountain again. Anyway, we meet an elderly man. He's about 79, 80 years old, and he told us that his father, when he was a boy, which would have been around the 1880s, 1890s, had a very close-up look at the almasty. He lived on a farmhouse, and part of the house was derelict, and he entered this part of the house that was derelict and saw a young almasty sitting in a chair, and he said that he thinks it crawled through a hole in the roof. And interestingly, this was about noon. Usually almasty sightings are towards the evening, but this was about midday. He said it had red eyes, but not red as in glowing, red as in sort of bloodshot, covered in hair, and this long mane of dark hair, brown hair on the body, dark hair on the head. And he said when it saw him, it sort of pushed its head forward and the hair fell down in front of its face. And he was so scared he slammed the door and ran away. And when they investigated later, the creature had gone. Years later, in adulthood, he had seen one of the large snakes as well. He described it as being greeny-grey rather than black, about 4 metres long and about as thick as a human leg. And it had made his donkey rear up in fear. And he saw the creature slithering away, trailing dust and bits of grit behind it. In the meantime, Dave and Gregory had come across a little cave even further up the mountain, in which there was a nest of what looked like dwarf rhododendron. And it seemed that something had bitten these dwarf rhododendrons off and made this nest high up in the mountains. And I thought, well, that's either going to be a bear or it's going to be an almasty. Dave had got a body bag with him, and he put the entire nest in the body bag and brought it down. So, you know, we were back at the camp, and Dave comes down dragging a body bag behind him. We thought the mountain had finally got one of us, but it wasn't. It was this nest. So we put on gloves, and we went through it very finely. Adam, Chris, myself, we picked out a lot of hairs. Some of these hairs had midges on them, so we got very excited about that, and we sealed them up in little specimen bags to take back to England to be analysed. That was something we really got excited about now. We might have DNA evidence for something like this. That's another, a bit of a close-up at the glacier. It's like rumbling, dangerous, nasty glacier. From that area, we moved on to a little town called Freeman. Now, it's more of a village than a town. It's the size of a fairly small village, but it consists almost entirely of tower blocks. And it's very weird for such a small place to consist totally of high-rise flats. And it has one of the most awful genus loci of any place I've ever been to. Incredibly depressing place. It didn't have a dangerous or mean feel like Georgetown in Guyana. It wasn't full of irritating beggars like the Gambia. But by God, it was depressing. There was a palpable feel of hopelessness about the place. A lot of these flats were empty. A lot of them were never even occupied or even finished after the collapse of the Soviet Union. nobody ever lived in them. Very, very ugly and weird place. But several interesting things happened while we were there. One of them happened was we were staying in a small flat. There were 8 of us, 8 fully grown men, in a small, very Spartan flat that rarely had hot water, and the electricity was a bit iffy as well. It would come on and off as it's wont. But one day Keith was out on the tawdry little veranda overlooking the town, and he said, "There's a cow out here eating a fire." So I had to go and look. Indeed there was a cow eating a fire. It was a brown cow, and it was eating a small fire with relish. It was really, occasionally it would draw back as it was scorched a bit, then it would go and continue eating the fire. And another cow came along to try and share the first cow's fire, but the first cow wasn't having any of it and chased the second cow away and really enjoyed the fire. But it's a sort of place where cows wander into people's flats and nobody bats an eyelid. Anyway, we split up again. Myself and Chris and Keith went to investigate some small caves, all very overgrown caves, where some human-like remains had been found. Gregory had located them, but he hadn't really looked at them closely yet, so we took this opportunity to look at them. There, you can see there a jawbone, part of the pelvis, part of the ribs. Unfortunately, they were all transparently those of a modern human. One of them was of a very elderly woman who had lost almost all of her teeth. The other was of a younger man, but they were all modern human. In the meantime, whilst we were doing that, Adam and Dave had gone to stake out an abandoned farm. This was the farm where Anatoly, in the 1980s, had seen an almasty. And the farm itself had quite an interesting history. Just how true it is, I don't know. But the story goes that it was owned by an old couple. And in 1973, local people who were related to this old man got wind that he'd got a lot of money stored away and he was going to spend it on something. And the story doesn't relate what he was going to spend it on, but he was going to spend it on something. And he lived there with his wife in this small farm. His relatives turned up, 3 of them, demanding a share of the money. There was a bit of a kerfuffle, and the old man got stabbed. The old woman picked up the knife and stabbed the murderer. Then the remaining 2 men got the knife off the old woman and stabbed her to death. And then they took off to the mountains and were eventually picked up by the police. No one's been near the place since, more or less. It's never been inhabited anyway. It consists of 3 main buildings surrounded by an L-shaped veranda and then a number of outbuildings, and very overgrown now. A few years back, 3 shepherds were drinking in there one night, and the door to the veranda opened and a massive almasty, some 7 feet tall, walked up to the nearest man, picked him up by the shoulders and moved him out of the way, carried along the veranda, jumped off the veranda and disappeared into the night. So we decided it would be an interesting place to stake out. Now, according to people that have been there before, stuff happens from around about 10 o'clock till about 12 o'clock at night, and then there's a lull till around about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. So we set up some camera traps there. We had used camera traps before up at White Cliff, but all we got on them was the rising and setting of the sun and occasionally vegetation moving. Adam spent a night there with Dave and said it was bitterly, bitterly cold. He did hear something crashing around in the undergrowth, but didn't see anything. So it was decided that the next night I'd join him there as well. Now, in the meantime, in the day, rather than just sit around and do nothing, we decided to go and have a look at a glacier in a place called Santi. Now, Gregory said that occasionally you'll get an avalanche and it will kill both domestic animals and wild animals, and they're one of the food sources for the almasty. It will come down and scavenge off the carcasses. So it might be an idea to go up to where the glacier is and take a look and see if there's any dead animals around. So we all set off one morning, fairly early, and before we even got to the actual mountain, we were going through a very flat, wooded area, and we heard a really deep, ferocious, sort of booming roar coming from some bushes. And Gregory turned to me and said, "That's no animal I know of." And this vocalisation continued. It seemed to be very threatening, and it was in a clump of bushes, maybe 3/4 the size of this room. So we split up. Everyone whipped their cameras out. We split up into sort of V formation to surround whatever was in these bushes. And I remember my hands shaking. I think this might be it. You might be getting film of a relic hominid. And the noise became louder and louder and louder. And I was expecting rocks to start come whizzing from this clump of bushes. And then the thing revealed itself. And it was Alexei who had snuck up in front of us and was hiding in the bushes and roaring. So we continued onward and upward, following the mountain up towards the glacier. And Gregory had said that there might be a few small streams we have to cross. So we might get our feet wet. Gregory's the master of understatement. He would say things like, "I think this way is the best way for us, this is safest," and would take us across some murderous terrain where we nearly died. And this was a lovely example. These little streams were increasingly violent torrents full of meltwater. And we had to cross a number of them. And the going was terribly tough, and I was beginning to get worried that I was going to get swept away by these. And on either side there were great slippery, jagged rocks, so the going was very, very slow. Eventually we got up to the glacier, and we could see where the avalanche had come, and there was lots of pulped trees, one very dead, very rancid cow, too rancid for the almasty to eat, I would have thought. So we had a quick meal up there, not with the rancid cow, and then started coming back down. And we took another route down with even more violent rapids. We got to one that looked a little bit too violent to cross. So we hoiked a log across this to take it across. And Gregory, who was quite nimble, hung onto one side and Dave onto the other. I tried to get across, halfway across, the sheer strength of the water just ripped my legs from under me. And I felt myself go shooting off down these rapids, soon to be smashed to bits on the rocks. Luckily, Gregory grabbed me by the collar and hauled me out. So that's 4 times Russians tried to kill me. Then Chris, who weighs about half as much as me, tried to get across, and he was swept away like a piece of straw. Once again, thankfully, we managed to grab him and pull him out, although he lost his mountaineering stick. So we came home soaking wet and cold, and feeling very sorry for ourselves. So that night, we decided to stake out the farm. That's the veranda. That's where the 3 shepherds were drinking and the preacher walked along. Those are the buildings there. Now we set up camera traps. Anatoly brewed up some red wine and honey because the scent is meant to attract the creature. We left out bread, a bit of fruit, and we all took up our station and just stared into the darkness and waited. About 10 o'clock, one of the camera traps goes off flash, and then I hear a noise, very like a bird twittering. I remember Gregory said, the almasty makes his twittering noise. Then silence, nothing. And I sit hour after hour after hour, staring off into the darkness. Finally, when it gets really cold, we all go into one of the little rooms and we light a fire in the stove. Anatoly goes off to investigate what might be around in the outbuildings. He disappears completely and doesn't come back. Hour follows hour, and follows hour, no Anatoly. Anatoly is totally vanished. So we're sitting in this room. Dave Archer's fallen asleep. Adam and myself are sitting on this rather battered old mattress, silently just waiting. The door, which is about 7 feet tall and very heavily built, is 2 or 3 inches ajar, and through the door streams starlight and moonlight. It's a very clear night. Then something makes a deep, guttural noise. Not like the noise of Alexa Warren, this is something totally different. The nearest I can get to it phonetically is but it's very deep, very throaty, and it seems to come from outside the farm. And I turn to Adam and say, "Did you just hear that?" And he says, "Yeah." Then something walks along the veranda and goes past the door that's slightly ajar, blocking out, for an instant, the starlight and the moonlight to a height of 7 feet. And I said, "Did you see that?" And he said, "Yes, there's something on the veranda." We grab our digital cameras, run out onto the veranda to find silence and darkness. Whatever it was out there had vanished. Now, what was it on that veranda? I can't say that it was an almasty, but something made a noise that I, as a zoologist, couldn't identify. Something big and upright walked past that door, and it blocked out the light, the starlight and moonlight, to a height of 7 feet. Was it an almasty? I don't know. So we do a circuit of the area, can't find anything, still can't find Anatoly. Come first light, we do another circuit, find Anatoly asleep in one of the outbuildings. He'd just gone off by himself and fallen asleep. So, we go back to Neutrino, have a look at what's on the cameras. Sadly, nothing except moving vegetation. But it was quite an interesting experience in a very eerie place. So we have news from Sergit, the man who thought he had found the almasty's body. And he tells us that the tooth that he had extracted from the creature, he had given to this old wise woman to use as a charm. And we come and meet this wise woman in a local village. So we travel to this village, go to this restaurant to meet the wise woman, who's not the toothless wizened crone I was imagining, but a fairly ordinary looking woman. She says that she doesn't have the tooth anymore. She's given it to her daughter, who's got it in the city now, in their flat. And she rings her up to look for it, and they tear the flat apart looking for this tooth. Don't find it, but they did find an old red kettle that they thought they'd lost. I'm starting to get a bit suspicious here. Hang on, if this tooth was supposed to have been used as a magic charm, why is it being treated so offhandedly? And I'm beginning to find it a little bit suspect. Anyway, soon afterwards, half the party, Dave, Keith and Adam had to return to England, so it was just myself and Dr. Chris and the Ukrainians and Russians were left. We went to interview some more witnesses, and these were some of the best witnesses. There was one gentleman who had seen the almasties on 4 separate occasions, and he'd seen them in family groups. He'd seen a large black adult and what seemed to be 2 smaller grey creatures. And the first time he'd seen them was 1974, and they'd been sitting together in some rocks, and he thought they were humans as he approached them. When they got up, looked at him, turned and walked away, he realised that they were almasty. Most recently, he said some German tourists were with him when he'd seen one of these creatures, a big dark-coloured one, go into an abandoned house. And he said before it entered the house, it turned around and glared at them. So he wanted to go in and follow it, but the Germans wouldn't go with him. Another man who was the deputy director of Elbrus National Park said that a few years ago he had lost some sheep. They'd run off up the mountain, something had spooked them. And he was looking for these sheep, and it was twilight, when he saw what he thought was a cow lying down in the hearthrug in front of him. Then the cow seemed to stand up on its hind legs, and he thought it was a very big man. So he shouted to him in Bulgarian, have you seen any sheep go past here? No answer. Then he shouted to him in Russian, have you seen any sheep go past here? No answer. He got closer and noticed it had these massive shoulders and high domed head, and was covered with shaggy fur. He realised it was the almasty. So he decided to go and get his uncle to show his uncle. And he ran off back down the path, looked back up, and the creature was heading up for the mountains, but by the time he got his uncle and got back there, the creature had gone. We also met an elderly couple, both of whom had seen the almasty, and one of whom had interacted with it. The old man, let's see if I've got a picture of that. Well, that's Anatoly. You see, this is why I hate technology. I'll get telling the story and I get behind on pictures. That's Anatoly brewing up the red wine and honey. That's the little stove with Dave. That's another view of the abandoned farm. Another view of the abandoned farm. That is where the creature walked through, if it wasn't really the creature. That's the mountain in the background. That's the river that nearly washed us away, part of it, anyway. There's us crossing the river. That's the glacier, the top of it, where the avalanche was. That muck on top of it is all of the pulped trees. That is from the farmhouse. That's the one of the camera traps from the farmhouse. Absolutely nothing on it. Don't know what set it off. Maybe the movement of vegetation. We talked to this other couple. One man said that just about 3 years ago he was sitting alone in his house when he heard a stone hit the window, and he thought it was his son who had come to visit. He said, "Come on in, the door's open." Another stone hits the window. He shouts, "Come on, the door's open." Another stone hits the window. "What's going on out here?" He goes into the yard and sees in the corner what he thought was a sack of wool. He gets closer and sees this tiny hair-covered figure about the size of a 5-year-old child. And he said he didn't get a good look at its face, but the hands were pale and looked very human, and it seemed to be making gestures that it wanted food. So he brought some bread out, and he took the bread and went away. And he had a feeling that there was a second one there as well, so he put some more bread out, and that vanished. His wife said that back in the 1940s, when she'd been exiled with a lot of other Balkarians to Kazakhstan, she had been called to her brother's house and found a lot of local children crying in the corner of the house, and she asked them what had upset them. She said, "Look through the window." And she looked out through the window, which once again was shutters rather than glass, and saw a strange creature in the backyard. And her description of it recalled cousin It from the Adams family. She said she couldn't see any details of the face because the hair was hanging down in front of it, and the whole upper part of the body seemed to be covered in long hair. And it seemed to be an immature almasty that was amusing itself, and it stood in the backyard waving its arms and making bird-like noises, and occasionally it would stoop down and grab some earth and throw it at the house. And she watched it for about an hour doing this, and whilst the children were absolutely terrified, and she said it was still there when she went away, and she was amazed that anybody was interested in such a crazy topic. Why were people interested in this? Because like most of the people we talked to, they thought the almasty was just another animal, or usually they thought it was a very primitive form of man. Anyway, we return to the tawdry flat in Neutrino, and who should turn up but Sergit. And he gives us this cock and bull story, and this is it pretty well verbatim. The jinn, which are Islamic spirits, we derive the word genie from it, made the carcass of the almasty disappear, and they made the tooth of the almasty disappear. But don't you worry, because I have a hair here from the queen of all the almasty who has red hair, and it shows what was transparently a vegetable fibre. So, this guy was Gaga. Now, I don't think he was out to hoax people or make money. I think he had a mental problem, because he trekked all the way up that mountain several times and dug at the rock face. He was believing his own madness. But he was the only person out of all the people we talked to that gave any kind of supernatural attribute to the almasty. Everybody else thought it was a very primitive man. We moved on to another area, and these are some of the cliffs we investigated. There we are. There's fabled cryptozoologist. We found some more dung, which we bagged up for analysis. There we are, walking along the cliffs. That's an abandoned farm, and yet another abandoned farmhouse that we had a look round. It was in a terrible state. No self-respecting almasty would ever go there, and there was no farmers to leave food out for it. And there wasn't even any Bulgarian jazz mags left in there. Very disappointing. Now, when we were up by these cliffs, I did find a large naked footprint, but it was in very hard mud, and you don't really get the impression of it there. It was barefoot, about the size of a big human foot. It could well have been a human being, but why a farmer was tromping around it there without shoes on, I don't know. But it wasn't detailed enough to cast, and that was about the best photograph I could get of it. There's another one. You can just about make out the shape of the foot there. Was it an almasty? I don't know. But what the hell is anybody doing barefoot on the mountain? There's some more wonderful little caves that we visited. There's some dung. We bagged it up. I'm inclined to think that that was some dung from a domestic animal. It didn't look like the dung we got from other places, but we're still making analysis on it. Yet another abandoned shack. There's Anatolian. In the background, there's a sort of sigil that was left there. There's a tribal marking, Bulgarian tribal marking. It's a close-up of it. I drew a bat signal next to it. That's the other man there who'd seen the almasty on several different occasions, including in the family group. That's the old couple. The old man who saw the young almasty and fed it bread, and that's his wife who saw back in Kazakhstan in the 1940s, who saw that the creature resembled cousin it. Aha! This was the last place we went to. This was a place worthy of Hammer Horror or Doctor Who or Scooby-Doo even. It's wonderful. It looks like a castle. In fact, it's a restaurant. It's not all that old. It was built in the 1980s. And it was modelled on an old Bulgarian castle. So you've got a tower, you've got all sorts of outrooms like this. It used to be a restaurant. It must have been wonderful in its time. But it was abandoned. There's the tower there, about 45 feet tall. We heard that the almasty had been seen on occasion around there. And not so long ago, there were a group of armed policemen there. And they'd heard this terrible screaming that they thought was the almasty. And despite having guns, they just cleared off. So we were armed with nothing except some cameras. So we decided to stake the place out. Set up our camera traps, lit a little fire, brewed some honey and some wine. We left food about. That's what we got. A bat. A bat, darkness and silence, except that. A human-like figure seen on one of the camera traps. And I realised that was just me having set it. It went off. So we came back home again with our samples. The hair samples were sent off to Dr. Scott Diettel of the University of New York, a forensic scientist who often helps police in their investigations. His analysis revealed that they were human and from the ethnic type in that area. So what we think with the cave, or that bloody dangerous mountain that nearly killed me 3 times, it was being used by a hunter, because people did go up there hunting. The skull and the dung, we haven't got the analysis back yet. We're hoping that our old friend, Professor Lars Thomas at Copenhagen University can do this for us. But we still have the samples awaiting his attention, and as soon as we get the results back, I'll let you know.
Regrettably, time's got the best of us, so I'm afraid we're not going to have any questions, but thank you again, Richard Freeman.
One last thing, like every red-blooded male here, I'm staying on to see Kitty Claw and the Burlesque show, but after that I will be signing copies of my second book, Explore Dragons, at the CSS stand, and it's at the knockdown price of £10.